I want to show you, before I get to the actual story, I want to show you a clip that went viral, I think about last week, and it went viral on TikTok especially. But basically, it is a pastor named Josh Blevins of Grace Calvary Chapel in St. Joseph, Missouri. And this is a sermon he gave last week where he told his congregation what he thought about a school board candidate or two.
And we have some people running that need to be in, and others who, quite frankly, have agendas of their own that are apart from the truth of God and in the darkness. And so we want to pray for and encourage our sister, Kim Miller, who is running, she goes to church here, and encourage you. And I already know some people are like, well, Josh, you know, the IRS says you can't tell us who to vote for. Listen, the government should have no type of leash that is strong enough to hinder the church from doing what is right. That's period. And so we want to encourage you to vote for Kim Miller. I will be voting as well for Jennifer Kearns, just because there are 2 seats open, and those are the 2 candidates I believe will uphold the strongest and focus on the strongest things that need to be focused on the school board, and hopefully be a bulwark of protection against some of the ideologies that are coming into our students' education.
So the reason I play that for you, he mentioned Kim Miller and Jennifer Kearns. Well, guess what? In their community, those 2 went on to win their elections. This is just like a week ago. They won their elections, and part of why they won their elections is because they had this megachurch pastor telling everyone to vote for them. Now, that is a violation of something called the Johnson Amendment. I've talked about this. I talked about it last week. The Johnson Amendment says nonprofit organizations cannot tell you how to vote from the pulpit or from their organizations. Planned Parenthood, as supportive of abortion rights as they are, cannot say, go vote for the Democrat because that's the abortion protection candidate. That's the pro-choice candidate. They can't do that. They can say, hey, if you're curious about who to vote for, here's our scorecard, and the following members got A's, but they cannot send you anything that says, go vote for this person. And that's the same rule that applies to churches. They cannot tell you how to vote. And that's exactly what that guy just did. He violated the Johnson Amendment when he told people how to vote. And in a system that worked, the IRS would, if they learned about that, the IRS could say, okay, you're no longer a nonprofit organization. People cannot write off their donations to you on their taxes. It's going to be harder for you to raise funds because you're a political group now. You are not just a nonprofit doing whatever it is you do. And the thing I posted last week when I did a story about this is that even though we have so many examples of pastors doing exactly that, it seems like the IRS never investigates it, and they never take action against those churches. Now, last week I did a story where we found out the IRS did send a warning letter to a church that did exactly what this pastor just did, but for whatever reason, they decided to shut down that investigation as soon as Trump came into office. But again, just goes to show you, this is what pastors do at a lot of churches, especially conservative Christian ones. They tell you how to vote. And that guy even said in his little speech, I already know some people are like, well, Josh, you know, the IRS says you can't tell us who to vote for. And then what did he say in response to that? Well, listen, the government should have no type of leash strong enough to hinder the church from doing what's right. So he doesn't care what the IRS says. He knows the rules, and he's going to break them anyway because he knows damn well the IRS is not going to come after him, because that's what always happens. Now, the reason I bring this up is that recently Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma introduced a bill, and I want to show you this bill. This is something he just introduced. What's this called? Short title. This is the Free Speech Fairness Act. This is what he introduced. And this is a lot of legalese, but I just want to show you this bit right here. And it says, what is this bill actually going to do? An organization shall not fail to be treated as organized and operated as a nonprofit. He says, if you're a nonprofit, we are not going to take away your nonprofit status if you have participated or intervened in any political campaign on behalf of or against any candidate, as long as you do two things. We're not going to take away your nonprofit status as long as two things happen. Number one, as long as you do it in the ordinary course of the organization's regular and customary activities. What does that mean? That means if you endorse a candidate while giving a sermon, which is the thing you do every week anyway, we shouldn't hold it against you. That's part one. And part two says, as long as it results in the organization incurring not more than de minimis incremental expenses, which is a fancy way of saying, as long as you're not spending money to endorse the candidate, we don't care. So what that pastor I showed you, what he just did under this bill, he did it during a sermon. It didn't cost him any money to do it. James Lankford is saying, then we shouldn't even worry about that guy losing his tax-exempt status. That pastor should never have to worry about it. This is the bill that Lankford has just introduced. It would destroy the Johnson Amendment once and for all. It would allow pastors to endorse candidates every week, right? And that's what he wants to do. And the thing to point out is that conservatives love treating the IRS as a boogeyman, as people who are coming after their churches, trying to attack them, trying to take away their tax-exempt statuses. And Donald Trump played off of this for a long time when he was campaigning. He said, I'm going to undo the Johnson Amendment. He said, I filed an executive order, so the Johnson Amendment is no longer in effect, which was a lie, because that's not how you get rid of it. You need an act of Congress to undo the Johnson Amendment. And James Lankford knows Trump is lying about that, which is why he introduced a bill to get rid of the Johnson Amendment. But the thing is, no matter how many conservative pastors have endorsed candidates from the pulpit, the IRS has not gone after them. In over 70 years since the Johnson Amendment went into effect, maybe 2 ministries have been punished by the IRS, and one of them lost it because they paid for a full-page ad in a newspaper telling people how to vote. Like, it was that egregious. And that's kind of it. So one of the reasons I wanted to point this out is Lankford's bill, which he wants to use to destroy the Johnson Amendment. He went on a talk show hosted by a Christian hate group leader named Tony Perkins to talk about this bill. And I want to play this first clip for you because Lankford openly admits you don't need this bill because everybody knows the IRS doesn't actually do shit when it comes to revoking the nonprofit status from any of these churches.
Well, let's go to something else you and I passionately care about, and that is the ability of pastors to preach the Word of God as it applies to the issues of our day, including politics. You care about that as one who's been in the ministry, and so you have introduced the Free Speech Fairness Act. Talk about that.
Yeah, pastors should be able to preach the Word of God. They should not have to worry about an IRS agent sitting in their congregation monitoring their speech to make sure they don't mention something in politics in their sermon. That's absurd. But we're the United States of America. Pastors have First Amendment rights, just like every single American has First Amendment rights. Why we even discuss this at all is because decades ago, something was added into the IRS rules called the Johnson Amendment that says if a church endorses some political candidate, and again, that's up to the interpretation of the IRS agent, what that actually means, then they could actually have IRS take away their nonprofit status. So churches often live in fear of something that has literally never happened to any church, but they just live in fear of that.
Right.
So it restrains their speech. So all I'm trying to do is be able to clarify and say pastors have the same free speech rights as everyone else. Now, I don't believe pastors should preach politics all the time. I think they should talk about Jesus and salvation and the goodness and grace of God all the time. I think that should be their obsession to be able to talk about. But when things like abortion come up or marriage comes up or so many other things, or when there's an election coming and they encourage people to go vote or say there's an obvious candidate here that shares our values, they shouldn't be restrained from that either. And so this gives the opportunity for people to just freely speak as every other American.
So a few things about that interview right there, because Lankford was just making shit up the entire time. One of the things he said is that pastors should not have to worry about an IRS agent sitting in their congregation, monitoring their speech, which is a thing that has happened a total of 0 times ever. Not only does the IRS not sit in church and listen and like be on the lookout for what you're saying, the history of pastors endorsing candidates in the church, you could look this up. It's called Pulpit Freedom Sunday. There were pastors who literally endorsed candidates from the pulpit and videotaped it and sent those videos to the IRS because they want to bait the IRS into coming after them so they could file a lawsuit, get it up to the Supreme Court, so that the Supreme Court says it's fine, pastors can say whatever they want, no punishment ever when it comes to your nonprofit status. So this idea that IRS agents are sitting in your congregation, not only are they not doing that, pastors openly bait the IRS to come after them. So like, don't tell me IRS agents are like monitoring you. No, they have nothing to do with this. If anything, they're not paying any attention to what's going on in the pulpit. The other thing Lankford said, he admitted the churches often live in fear of something that has literally never happened to any church. Well, then maybe those pastors are dumb. Like, why are they fearing something that has literally never happened? Maybe because it's literally never going to happen. So then don't be afraid of it. No, none of these pastors are afraid of the IRS. They love being able to say, the IRS might come after me, but this is the right thing to do, so I'm going to do it anyway. It reminds me of all those horrible conservative comedians. They all have like Netflix specials with duct tape over their mouths for the thumbnail. And they're like, hey, people don't want me to say this. I'm being silenced, but I'm not going to let them shut me up because I got something to say, probably about trans people. And again, they're saying this on their Netflix special that they got paid a ton of money to make. Like, just the audacity of pretending like you're being silenced when we have so much evidence that you are never silenced about any of this stuff. And even Lankford admits it's literally never happened that the IRS has come after them. And then finally, he says this thing like, pastors should be able to say whatever they want. So when things like abortion come up, or marriage comes up, or so many other things, or when there's an election coming and they want to encourage people to go vote, or say there's an obvious candidate that shares our values, they shouldn't be restrained from that. And what's interesting is how he tries to conflate all 4 of those things. No one has ever said a church cannot talk about abortion. No one has ever said a church cannot talk about marriage. They might be bigots, they might be wrong about all that stuff, but no one's ever said, hey, IRS, this church said same-sex marriage is unbiblical, you should go after them. That has never happened, and it never should happen. And then he says, oh, well, some churches want to encourage people to go vote. That's fine. Even conservative churches can say, hey, everyone, there's an election coming up. You should go vote. Hell, you can even have them fill out voter registration cards in the lobby. Some black churches do that. They call it souls to the polls. We're all going to go vote together. That is all legal and fine. No one is saying the IRS should punish any of those churches for doing those things. The only thing they should not be able to do, according to the IRS, is say, this is how we want you to vote. And baby Jesus is watching over you, and he's going to cry if you don't vote the way I tell you to. You can't do that. That's the only rule. And Lankford just says, yeah, people say, like pastors are worried about talking about abortion and marriage and telling people who to vote for. Like, no. You can do the first 2 things. But no, the last thing is different. One of those things is not like the other. He's just lying about all of this. It's unbelievable. Either he doesn't get it or he totally gets it and he's lying. And I'm not sure which of those is better. And then here's the last thing Lankford says that I wanted to point out to you. He claims that liberal pastors tell their congregations to vote for Democrats all the time, which they don't, but he says they do it because they know the IRS isn't going to go after liberal churches. The IRS is only going to go after conservative ones.
Quite frankly, churches that are more left-leaning, they talk about politics all the time. They endorse candidates all the time and don't live in fear of the IRS because there's a belief that they have they're not going to come after us. We're on the left. It's only going to come after churches on the right on that. We need to be able to make sure this is very clear. The IRS doesn't have the authority to go monitor the speech of pastors and of church leaders. Let's have them do tax collection. That's what their job is, not monitoring free speech.
That one is even a bigger lie than the other one. First of all, left-leaning churches do not endorse candidates all the time. I wish they friggin' would at this point, but they don't. And guess what? If they did, I am all for the IRS revoking their tax exempt status too. By the way, there were a couple of black churches in the South that told people to vote for Kamala Harris in the last presidential election. I think they should lose their 501c3 status as well. But the point is, no, this doesn't really happen on the left. They really don't make a habit of doing this. If you actually enforce the Johnson Amendment, it's conservative Christian churches that would be impacted the most. But the other thing, this idea that, the reason liberal pastors do endorse candidates is because they know the IRS is only going to go after conservative churches. No, that has never happened. Not a single pastor in America who is liberal has said, you know what? The IRS always goes after right-wing churches, but they're never going to come after me. They're never going to come after me. They've never thought that ever. Because the point is, we all know the IRS doesn't go after anybody. And also, this idea that, what did Lankford say at the end? The IRS doesn't have the authority to go monitor the speech of pastors. They do have the authority to enforce their own rules because they're the ones that give you a nonprofit status. But then he says, let's have the IRS do tax collection. That's what their job is, not monitoring free speech. Well, guess what? That's bullshit. You know how I know that? Because Republicans don't want the IRS collecting taxes either. That's why they want to abolish the IRS and get rid of all their agents. So what is Lankford doing? He's lying about everything because that's what Republicans do. Like, the fact is, if the Johnson Amendment were enforced, that's not even monitoring free speech. It's just making sure that groups that get a government benefit that they asked for are playing by the rules they signed up to follow and that they benefit from. And I mean, if they want to be a political group more than a religious one, they are free to give up their tax exemptions, but they can't have it both ways. And it is amazing to me that Tony Perkins, the hate group leader guy who was interviewing Lankford, he didn't bring up any of this. And I don't know if that means he's also equally ignorant or he's just a really bad interviewer. It could be all of the above. But again, I don't think this bill will pass because I don't think Republicans in Congress actually want to pass anything meaningful. They're not going to waste their time trying to get this one through. But even if it does, it'll only stop the IRS from doing something it doesn't even do to begin with. It's not like they're going to start enforcing their rule anytime soon. Just a ridiculous thing. Okay, I'm done with that story. What other questions we have here? I'm not even sure why they care about getting rid of the Johnson Amendment. They violate it with impunity. Yeah, I mean, again, it's even if it's in effect right now, and it technically is, nothing happens. I've done 2 weeks of stories about how the IRS doesn't do anything about obvious breaking of their rules. So what are they worried about? Honestly, at this point, I think if the IRS is not going to go after churches for any of this, I think every left-leaning church in America has an ethical obligation to tell their congregations to vote for Democrats. They should, because it's the right thing to do at this point. Find the most progressive candidate and get Republicans out of office. You could make that an ethical argument. But also, why are we giving up unilateral disarmament here? Like, it makes no sense to say we're going to play by the rules even if Republicans are not going to do it. Then Democrats should stop playing by the rules. It's the same way I feel about gerrymandering. I live in Illinois, which is gerrymandered to benefit Democrats. And there are Republicans in my state all the time that are like, we need to get rid of gerrymandering. It's like, okay, let's do it on a national level and get rid of it everywhere. And then they're like, no, that's not what I meant. I just meant in this blue state and nowhere else. I thought the IRS was about collection of taxes on property and wages. Why are they concerned with it unless they are getting huge amounts of money? Because it's about playing by the rules. Everyone needs to pay their taxes, with the exception of nonprofits, which in theory provide a service to people. And we want them to get money because they're not about making a profit. They're about giving you a service. So I think it's good. I've heard this argument online. Let's tax churches. That's a dumb argument. Because you can't just tax churches. What you would be doing is taxing all nonprofit groups. And I think that's bad. I want nonprofit groups to thrive. I want them to be successful, and that includes churches. But the IRS has an obligation to say, these are the rules you have to follow for this benefit of not paying your taxes. That's it. Everyone else, like, I don't care if you owe very little money, but also the IRS should go after people who owe lots of taxes. I think they should spend their time on people who don't pay their taxes. And it's telling that Republicans want to take away resources from the IRS so they can't investigate like the rich people who don't pay them. I want everyone to pay them equally the way, and we should have a different discussion about what those tax rates should be. But it doesn't matter if a church would just owe a little bit of money. They just need to play by the same rules. I don't want a system where because you're Christian, you're allowed to avoid the rules and everyone else has to play by them. That's what I don't like here. I hate that they're pretending this is the First Amendment issue. It's an issue of being a nonprofit. Correct. Pastors can talk about whatever they want. They're not being muzzled because they can't endorse a candidate. They agreed that if you get a tax exemption, you don't endorse candidates. And now they're like, what? I have to play by that rule? That's not fair. No, you don't get to have it both ways. If you want to endorse a candidate, go do it, but then pay your taxes like all the other groups that endorse candidates. That's it. Pick a lane. What was that one case in Florida? Pastor said to vote for these 3 school board candidates and the IRS said that's A-okay. I'll help you out. That's every single case ever. Again, there are so many examples of pastors telling their congregations to vote for this candidate or that one or this slate of school board candidates. I played video last week of pastors saying, go vote for these 3 school board candidates. And again, the IRS just said recently, all right, we're shutting down the investigation, even though all we did is say, hey, maybe you should play by the rules. And the church's lawyers are like, no, we're not going to play by your stupid rules because we're Christian. And the IRS is like, all right, sorry we asked. And they back down.